University System of Maryland's second Wills and More Week in recognition of National Estate Planning Awareness Week. My name is Ann Kolakowski. I'm Director of Gift Planning Services for the University System of Maryland. And we are delighted that you have committed yourself to learning about this important topic, and we hope that you will be with us for as many sessions as possible. Before we begin today's program, I just want to share a few housekeeping items. Our session is being recorded, and links to all recordings will be sent after the week is over, together with a short survey to help us plan for next year. If you didn't register for other sessions, but you'd like to attend one or more of them, simply join us at noon each day, or whatever your time zone says, by using the link sent in the email that contained today's link. It's not necessary to fill out the registration again. If you have questions as we go along, please put them in the Q&A box, and you'll be able to upvote questions that you like a lot, so we can answer as many as time permits. Lastly, all of this week's presentations are offered for informational purposes only. The content should not be considered as a substitute for advice from legal, tax, or financial professionals. It's now my pleasure to introduce one of my system colleagues, Megan Carnell, who is the new Executive Director of Gift Planning for the University of Maryland, College Park. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you so much, Ann, and good afternoon and welcome to our participants. As Ann mentioned, I'm Megan Carnell, the Executive Director of the Office of Gift Planning at the University of Maryland, College Park, and I'm delighted to introduce the two speakers for our session today. Peter Wyrough is founder and chief executive officer at Value Wealth Services, an investment advisory and financial planning firm in Annapolis, Maryland. Peter is responsible for overseeing the strategic direction, operations, and management of client assets at Value Wealth. He started his career in 1984 at the DC-based firm of Johnston, Lemon and Company. And in 1989, Peter was recruited by Legg Mason Woodwalker, where he worked for 15 years as a financial advisor while earning his CFP designation. Peter earned a BA from St. Vincent College in 1983. And next, it is my pleasure to introduce Brecht Buchheister. Brecht joined Value Wealth Services in late 2023 and comes to the firm after 17 years in the staffing solutions industry. Prior to his most recent professional endeavor, he worked for Merrill Lynch in New York, where he developed a solid foundation in wealth management, financial analysis, and client relations. Brecht resides in Southern Maryland with his wife and two young sons. And outside of office hours, you can find him somewhere outside on the family farm or the banks of the Patuxent River. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Peter and Brecht.
Megan, thank you so much for inviting us to come speak to your Wills Week this week. I wanted to thank Megan and Ann for this opportunity to bring about financial literacy and awareness and bring more knowledge to our listeners and be able to demystify the process of building wealth intentionally and the concept of estate plan, the whole concept of estate planning. I started the firm after working for these local firms of Legg Mason back in 1994. So I've had my own firm for about 21 years. We're located in Annapolis, Maryland, and our focus is to build a team of advisors who work together to provide a universal approach to aid our clients in creating a plan that encompasses investment management, estate planning, retirement planning, taxes, risks management, and general overall financial planning. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Brecht to discuss what we're going to try to get a talk about today.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, and thank you all for attending today. It's our pleasure to speak with you, and we hope that you have some good takeaways from the conversation. And the topic of the presentation is building wealth intentionally and passing it on. So we've assembled some topics, although not exhaustive on every concept, They're, for the most part, high level, and it's geared towards getting started. We don't get too into depth on money strategies or wills or estates, but we give you something that you can walk away from and have conversations around. And so we've gone through who we are, why the Wealth with Intention, getting started, some investing concepts. One that's very important is understanding, I think, is the rule of 72, protecting wealth, passing it with intention, family legacy, and action steps. And so we will intend to get through the meeting in about 45 minutes, and we'll leave time at the end for Q&A. By all means, if your question wasn't answered or you'd like to reach out to us individually, we're happy to take that email or address your question or have the conversation. So from there, we'll get into the next slide, please, Nicole. Is we have wealth and wealth with intention, and so on the left we have a picture of Scrooge McDuck, and on the right we have a family, a multi-generational family, and it's a juxtaposition, if you will, and it's not wealth in its own sense, doesn't necessarily have utility or a legacy, and that's almost what I suppose you could say what Scrooge McDuck has done. He built massive amounts of wealth, but had a bit of a reputation that preceded him with his family. And on the right, we have wealth with intention. And what is that? It's being able to build generational wealth, pass it down with families, have financial freedom in your life, financial flexibility, and leave a legacy, whether that's with your heirs, with your community, with passions that you have, say for a charity or a cause. And so what we're focusing on is building the wealth, and again, passing it on and establishing the legacy. And from there, it kind of gives us a good jumping off point for what we've done. And we put here that the building wealth, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. And a concept of financial planning is one, building emergency savings. And so we always want to have that. You never know when we're going to lose a job. With the environment that we're in right now, as an example, with the government shutdown, unfortunately, we have clients and friends that are affected. All of us have someone that we know that's affected by that. And unless you're in the military or other, I think there's some other circumstances where there are government employees getting paid, but not many. And so that would be an example when you might need emergency savings, or you need a roof repair in your house, or a friend of yours loses his job. Whatever the case may be, we want to have that before really doing almost anything. And that number that is frequently cited is 3 times your monthly spend. And so anytime we speak with somebody, that's the first question is, do we have emergency savings? And then from there, we turn to building up our tax-deferred or tax-free assets. And those can include 401ks, IRAs, health savings account, just to name a few. And each of those have different strategies. Of course, in the 401k, we want to at least put in up to what your company may be matching, or 403b. Either of those two. And then in an IRA, is it going into a Roth if you're below the income thresholds, or into a deductible IRA? Again, it's a different conversation, but we want to max out all of those buckets if we can. And then we turn to our estate plan, and we want to make sure that as we're speaking with clients, do you have a will? Do you have the proper beneficiaries? Maybe you had a new child, and your first child was the only one listed as a beneficiary on your IRAs or life insurance contracts. Or we've seen it come up before too, where someone is divorced and their ex-spouse is still listed as a beneficiary on that plan. And so it's wills, it's beneficiaries, it's power of attorneys. But those can be financial and health related. And so if you become incapacitated, is there someone that's able to pay your bills and step in and have access to your financial accounts? If we do not have a power of attorney on file with one of our clients, and again, they become incapacitated, we cannot take any direction from their family members or speak anything regarding their accounts. Another is an advance directive. And so if you become in a vegetative state, is there somebody that can make that decision on your end of life? And then lastly, we have asset titling, and that can include setting up a joint account, setting up beneficiaries on accounts, and that could also, of course, be real estate as well. But we want to make sure that in the event that anything were to happen to you, which it certainly can at any point, is can we make life as easy as possible on those that are there to handle your affairs? Peter, would you like to?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that I think all of you all should consider is to have at least some coach that you work with, whether that person is a family member, whether it's someone like us, but somebody that you can have a sounding board when you develop a plan. If you don't have a plan, then it's sort of hard to go back and determine where you are in life. And having been in this business for 40 years, I think one of the main problems is that we fail to plan, and we don't review our plan as often as we should. Having worked with people for 40 years, I've come to learn about human habits that I'm guilty of, that I think all of us are guilty of in a way. And one of those guilty pleasures is procrastination. And when we procrastinate, we don't know what damage that does over a long period of time. And one of the main concepts that I wanted to get across to you all today is just understanding what rate of return is, right? I think most of us have an idea of what rate of return is, or what I call annual rate of return is. But I think a lot of people in my industry, fail to teach it properly. And having been in the business for 40 years, I try to boil it down to one thing that I could one point that I could get across to all of you all is to really, what is rate of return? And I'm going to go through some basic concepts to teach that, and then and then when you want to get to a point where you can down the road be able to give money to the University of Maryland, or give money to a charity, or give money to someone, or pass it on to your family, developing a plan early on is very, very important. And then understanding this concept that I'm about to tell you about.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next slide, please, Nicole.
All right, so compound interest. So before we get into the slide, I'm going to just basically tell you that annual rate of return plus time equals compound rate of return. So what that means basically is, let's just use a simple example, and we're going to base it on a calendar year basis. So if we start with $100 on January 1st, and on December 31st of that calendar year, you have $105 at the end of the period of time, then your annual rate of return at that time is 5%. So you earn $5, and it's a 5% return. If I started with $100 in the beginning of the year and I end with $110 at the end of the year, then that's a 10% rate of return. So that rate of return is what we call our annual rate of return. Then if we look at time, then we can determine when at that particular rate of return your money earns what we call a double. So a double would be when $100 becomes $200, or when $200 becomes $400. And so for you all to understand rate of return is to understand time and how often you want to try to get your money to double over that period of time. So for example.
Okay, next slide, please, Nicole.
What I've been talking about is something that's called the rule of 72, which basically tells you that if I take my rate of return, my annual rate of return, and if I divide it by 72, which is the time period that we're looking at, 72 years, then it will tell me the number of years that it takes for my money to double. For example, if I earn an 8% return, I take 72 divided by 8. That means that my money will double in 9 years. So for example, if I only earn 1%, 72 divided by 1 would be equal to 72. So at 1%, it takes 72 years to get a double. At 8%, it takes 9 years to get a double. If I average 10%, 72 divided by 10 would be equal to 7.2 years. Well, why is that important? That's important because we have to go back and look at time and how life goes on. So we're all born at 0. And as we get older, our parents, they raise us, they feed us, they put us to bed, they do all the things that we need to do to grow up. And that whole process can typically take, up to 18 to 22 years before we are able to grow up, get an education, and then go out and find a job. And the issue with all of that is that takes up 22 years of time. Typically, most kids graduate from college when they're 22. And what we want to try to think about is when the child is born, we're typically not thinking about money too much. I remember growing up in my parents' generation, they didn't like to even talk about money. They didn't like talk about money. They didn't like talking about health. It was sort of a rude thing to talk about. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I think as parents, we want to start teaching our kids as young as possible. That's part of the problem in our country, is that financial literacy needs to be improved upon, and we have to start, taking on that responsibility as parents early on. And I'm going to show you the reason why is because if in this case, next slide, please. So if in this case, if you had an investor who started at birth with $10,000, which would be nice, but I would start with an increment smaller than that. But if you had $10,000 to invest for your child at birth, and they go to age 72 and they're earning 8% return on average per year, then that $10,000 would be worth $2,560,000. If they wait until the age of 9 before they gave the $10,000 to the child, then because you waited 9 years, it cost the child $1.28 million. And then the child would only have 1.2 million. Still not a bad number. But to simplify it in a better way, if you look at the rule of 72, the formula is your 72, you take 72 and you divide it by your annual rate of return. And that equals the number of years that it takes to get a double. Then you look at the time that you have left between now and when you want to retire. So let's say if you started at birth and your rate of return was 8%, then you know that you get a double every 9 years. One way to look at the rule is to change and to flip it around and just say, okay, in a 72-year period of time, whatever my average annual rate of return was for that 72 years, it's also equal to the number of doubles you'll achieve during that time. So for example, if my average rate of return is 8% for 72 years, then I will have 8 doubles in 72 years. If I only average 1% in rate of return for 72 years, then I will only have 1 double. So your rate of return is equal to the number of doubles you'll achieve. So for example, if each child was given $1,000, which is what the new Trump account is going to do starting next year, the government is going to give $1,000 to each newborn child. And I think this is a pilot program that will last for roughly 3 years, but they're going to give $1,000 to each child. And this is really important because this is how we're going to build generational wealth. But so if you took $1,000, and I'm going to show you my fingers here. Each finger represents 1%. So if I'm dealing with a 72-year period of time from my left hand to my right hand, then each finger is equal to 1%. And since in 72 years, the number of doubles is equal to the number of fingers that I have. So if we're in case we're at the 8th finger, that would be 8%. So if you take your $1,000 that you start at birth and you go 1,000 goes to 2,000, then it goes to 4, then it goes to 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256. So the 1,000 grows to 256,000 at 8% over 72 years. But as the example here shows, if I procrastinate 9 years before I start the $1,000, so I didn't give it at birth, I gave it when the child was 9, then rather than what I just effectively did is I lost the child a double. So they'll lose half the money. So rather than having 256, they're going to have 128,000 instead. So the sooner you start, then the more doubles you'll achieve depending on what your average annual rate of return is. And so that's the biggest message that I could get across, is that you have to start early. And I think rate of return, they just simply don't know what happens. Let's look at example for 10%. Let's say we all are very fortunate and we average a 10% rate of return for 72 years. Then you know right away that you're going to get 10 doubles if you're averaging 10%, because the rule says is that over a 72-year period of time, my rate of return is equal to the number of doubles I'm going to achieve for that time. So let's go back to the fingers.
Peter, can we, because I have some, I can show you on the next slide, and this is a great example of, but we want to make sure we get to a lot of other content in the deck.
Okay.
You can show more examples as we get towards the end. So Nicole, if we can advance the slide, please. There, Nicole. Thank you. And so what Peter's saying, it's the get going now, and that's what we want to convey about, it really ties into the rule of 72. And if we go next, we can show you even a more practical example, and this may be more I guess recent for some of the people on the call, is you're coming out of college, you just have your first job. And so can someone start investing at 25? I know that personally that was a tough time for me to scrounge up the money to invest into my 401k when I was living in New York, but I did. This isn't me, but it's an example of if someone starts investing at 25, make a lot of sacrifices. They don't get this house at the Jersey Shore or go out in the bars on the weekends, and they put money away. And so they're able to save $5,000, and they do that until the age of 35. And so it's $50,000 over 10 years. And then they stop. Again, speaking from personal experience, it was harder, almost as difficult, I should say, to save money at 35 as it was at 25, just due to having kids. And when we had kids, my wife and I made the decision that she would no longer work full time. And so we lost that income. And I had to be very intentional at 35, just as it was at 25. And let's just say that, this example, Alex does that, but he can't afford to invest anymore. So he takes a break. He puts kids through school and through college, what have you. Ben, on the other hand, gets out of college, has a really good time up until 35, doesn't really worry too much about saving. And then he starts his $5,000 investing, and he does that for 30 years. So Ben saves $150,000. Back to Peter's point about annual return, 7%. We know that this person would get a double every 10.3
years.
3 years. And so the question is, who has more money at age 65? And so as you think about it, again, it's one person invests $50,000, the other person invests $150,000. Logic would say that the person that's put away $150,000 would have more. But if we go to the next slide, please, Nicole. It's Alex, and so it ties in very well to the point Peter's making about having more time. And so Alex had 40 years of compounding. And so Alex invested 11.3%, has 11.3% more money, invested 67% less. And so I just think it's very, very impactful of, even if you started at 25 or you start at 35, you still are able to build a good nest egg. Of course, that's very dependent on getting a good rate of return at 7%, which Peter and I think is very achievable over a long period of time. But it's get going. It's get going. Start investing, putting it away. This could be in IRAs, it can be in your kids' college funds, whatever that might be. But it builds over time. It's just a snowball effect, and we don't want to wait, if possible, until we're in our 40s or 50s to think about it. It's what can we do now? I'm trying to get my children to think about saving money. It's very difficult in this YouTube and influencer world we live in, because everything they watch, someone has new stuff and fancy cars and they're unboxing something. And so I feel like I'll have to almost fight that or address it more than I did coming up. I think the first thing I saved for was Nintendo back in a long time ago. But as mentioned in the intro, I live on a farm, and my dad grew a tobacco crop for me when I was young. We put that into a mutual fund, actually, with Peter, and it grew. And so that taught me a lot about investing at an early age, and got my interest peaked in the market. And so again, back to tying it back into our agenda of building wealth and passing it along. It's how can we educate the next generation? How can we put coaches in their lives? How can we make them aware of compounding interest and when doubles happen, and the cost of waiting? And so as we kind of embarked on coming up with high-level investing concepts, that's what it was, is the rule of 72 and getting started and getting going.
One of the things I wanted to point out that I'm doing, I just became a grandfather. And for those of you who are listening who are self-employed, you might want to consider this. But what I'm going to do is I'm waiting for my daughter to get my granddaughter's Social Security number. But as soon as I have that, I'm going to be hiring my granddaughter to have photographs taken of her to be put on a brochure or handout for my business to help promote the idea of the rule of 72. And in exchange for her pictures, I'm going to pay her a modeling fee. And now my daughter will now have earned income, which then I get to deduct as a business expense. And her pictures will be on the brochure, which I'm going to do 18 years. So I'm going to give her $1,000 as a modeling fee. Then she'll have earned income, which she can then turn around and put 100% of that money into a Roth IRA, which will then grow tax-free. So if you imagine putting in 18 $1,000 increments into an investment that say averages 8% net to her by the time she's 72, and between the ages of 72 and the ages of 90, at 8%, each thousand will be worth roughly $255,000 a year tax-free that she'll have as income from when she retires until the ripe age of 90. So
I want to retire before 90, but
well, I mean, that's of course she's going to do other things that she needs to save. That's something that you all can do. I mean, going back to the rule again, I wanted to emphasize this point and emphasize it very clearly. Let's say you're averaging 10% a year, which would be high, but let's just use the numbers because it makes it easy. We know that at 10% over 72 years, you're going to have 10 doubles. So each $1,000 increment that you put in for that period of time would be worth roughly $1,024,000. Okay, so 1,000 grows to $1,024,000 over 72 years at 10%. It's slightly over 72 years, but that's the rule of 72 is an approximate number, but it's close. The point is that if you all procrastinate 7.2 years, so you didn't do it at birth, you did it at 7.2 years of age instead, okay? Because you gave the 1,000 at 7.2, when she turns 72, that 1,000 is only worth 500,000. So you cost her a double. By waiting 7.2 years, because of how compound interest works, you cost the child $500,000. If you wait until they're 14.4 years of age before you do the 1,000, then you cost them two doubles, which is roughly $750,000 per 1,000. If you wait until they're over 22 before they start at 10%, then you cost them close to $900,000, little less than $900,000 per 1,000. So because of the way compound return works, it's so important to get it started as early as possible. That's the point.
Thank you, Peter.
Yep.
It's great to give the real world examples. If we could go to the next slide, please, Nicole. So this shows, it's a little bit hard to read, the numbers, but it's the impact of missing the market's best days. Again, so it's one is we're talking about compound return and the impact of time. But here, if you can see, and I'll read it out to you, this goes back 20 years. And if you'd stayed fully invested in the S&P 500, you made 9.7%. Again, now if you missed just the 10 best days, and that is over those 20 years, that's 5,040 trading days approximately, and 10 days is 0.198% of those days, your return gets cut in half. And it's very emotional being invested in the market. It's almost impossible to time it. A lot of these best days happen after some of the worst days. Some of the best days were 08 and 09, and so it's tough. And to achieve these returns that Peter is talking about in the rule of 72, it requires the fortitude to stay invested through some very difficult periods. And so if you think back over the past 20 years, we had the great financial crisis. We had a pandemic. We had the Federal Reserve raising rates, and those are just three. And if you go back a little bit before that, of course, you had 9/11. And so it's staying invested for the long haul and being able to stomach some pretty tough volatility, which I think goes into. We'll go into the next slide, Nicole. And this, as we say, volatility is the price of admission. Another one of the sayings on Wall Street is that the stock market takes the stairs up and the elevator down. And one of my coaches in my investing lifetime has been Warren Buffett. Unfortunately, not personally, but I do read all of his annual reports and follow him almost everything he says religiously. And as he said, and this was in one of his annual reports, the light can go at any time from green to red without pausing at yellow. And that's what we saw happen, back during COVID. And so in 2020, things were pretty good. And then it was over in China. It wasn't necessarily coming this way, or at least we weren't sure. And then once it did, everything went to hell in the economy. And of course, for people's health too, there's a lot of concerns. But over 33 days, the market was down 33%. And so even if you look to now, we're all used to the market going up, which it's been a magnificent run going back the past 2.5 years, but it can also go down pretty quickly, down 33%. But then it also came back to not being able to time the market. It seemed like the world was ending back in 2020. And then it was up, finished year up 18%. It was up 65% off the low. Another one on the next slide is volatility continued. This was this year from February 19th to April 8th. And again, came off last year. The market was up. Everybody came into the year saying that they expected that to continue. And then President Trump came out with his tariffs. And then we saw a big decline. Not a lot changed. We made some reciprocal tariff agreements. There's still a lot of uncertainty with what's going to happen with China. But from February 19th to April 8th, 35 days, the market was down 18.7%. from April 8th until September 3rd was up 30%. Year to date, it's up 14.47. That was as of last week. Again, so we have to be able to stomach this volatility. Sometimes that can be the benefit of finding a coach, working with an advisor like me or Peter to help talk you through that. It's difficult to do on your own unless you're just fine with putting your money in the market and not looking at it, which works okay too, works just fine. But every personality and every person is different. So next slide, please, Nicole. So here we get into protecting wealth. And in this visual, we have insurance. That can be disability insurance, life insurance, umbrella liability insurance. Another one, this is with the check mark with the shield, is the emergency fund. One thing you do not want to have to do with your money is have to raise cash in a bad market. And so explain is if you have your emergency savings, but they're invested in the stock market, and you have a year where the stock market might be down 20%, you don't want to have to sell that money, potentially even generating capital gains to address an emergency. And so that's what that shield is. The other is titling assets, which we addressed somewhat. Went over, making sure that it's joint account, you have beneficiaries. There's such a thing as payable on death for bank accounts, transfer on death for brokerage accounts. And then the dollar sign with the arrow is taxes. And so we're always mindful of taxes, state taxes, capital gains taxes. You might want to do a 1031 exchange with real estate. At that point, you're working against the timeline. And then we, of course, have the state taxes when you die. And they're, depending on your level of wealth, can be very important, how assets are titled. And this is generally with this, with insurance, emergency funds, Peter and I can certainly handle it, but a lot of times too, we want to get attorneys involved when we're discussing some strategies, which we'll go through on the next slide. So here it's passing wealth with intention, and so we try to show that with a will, or trust beneficiary designations, it's a very clear path. We know that there's some conversations coming up later in the week on this topic, so we'll save the deep dive for that. But it's very, very important. Absent a will or trust beneficiaries, you go through what's called probate for your state, which can tie up money for long periods of time. There can be arguments. It can divide families. We want to be as intentional as we can about how we pass wealth down the line. Peter, I know this is something very passionate for you. If there's anything else you want to add
Well, just again, I think you have to have someone that you trust, create a plan, and then review the plan at a minimum of twice a year. And that would encompass, building wealth and then being able to pass on wealth with intention.
Thank you. Okay, Next slide, Nicole. And so here is as we started the journey, we had Scrooge McDuck, and then here it's where do we really want to be? And again, back to Warren Buffett quote is, someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree long time ago. And my goal is that my family says that about me, and I know it is for Peter's as well. He's planting the shade tree right now for his granddaughter, and my goal is to, starting first with my family, of course, want to make sure they're taken care of. I protect the wealth. I have wills, insurance, but that they're taken care of if something happens, and that my children have a life at least equal to or greater from a financial standpoint that what I did, more financial freedom. And with legacy, it's community, and community can be community center, it can be colleges, universities, endowments, charities, passion charities, helping out friends or family in times of need, whatever that might be. But without absent building wealth, saving, starting early, having beneficiary designations, having a will, having insurance in case something happens to you, and then if you start late, this becomes increasingly more difficult. And so as you saw in our mission statements, it's empowering. And so we're hoping that via this presentation, it's empowering you to go out and at least ask the right conversations, identify where you may have gaps in your own financial plan, or maybe you saw something today of rate of return. Your rate of return is not high enough. You don't have insurance. Wait a second, I don't know if I added my child to as a beneficiary, whatever that might be. We hope there's some takeaways. And on the next slide, we list just as recommended resources of places to go. And I won't read them all verbatim but it's Wall Street thought leaders. There's a lot of people and a lot of opinions, a lot of books. You really need to me, in my opinion, narrow your focus on what you're going to put in your head. And I don't know that anybody would argue with the people I've listed here. Warren Buffett, Jack Bogle, who started the index fund and at Vanguard Group. Peter Lynch was a very successful manager for Fidelity Magellan back in the 80s and 90s. Howard Marks has great thought pieces. Barry Ritholtz has podcast, useful websites, rocketlawyer.com. That might be if you didn't want to engage a lawyer and you had a pretty simple estate and just wanted to draft something. In our age of AI, it helps a lot. ChatGPT is very smart. I go to it pretty frequently just for different questions on financial planning topics or just information. It's really good. Investors Business Daily is a great. It's now a website for if you like following individual stocks and tracking those and what they call technical analysis, which could be a different concept. NerdWallet is great. I use it for taxes. Calculator.net. Peter showed that to me actually the other day. It can help with compounding interest if you want to just know what your money might grow to. Some books here, and then investing and financial planning. There's a couple of different options that you might have. Registered investment advisors they didn't really exist in the quantity that they do now when I started in the industry back in 2000. But you have registered investment advisories, which are practices not affiliated with big public companies. And I'm making no recommendation of what's good or bad. These are just options that you have. And so Peter and I are registered investment advisor. You can go to a large firm, UBS, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan. If you, depending on your level of wealth and sophistication, you can be a limited partner in private equity, private credit, hedge funds, venture capital. And then, of course, you have the option of doing it yourself, which I'd say most people it's a mix, and we help with 401ks, but where for our clients. But most people will engage in RIA and then do a lot of things themselves on their 401k. Next slide, please, Nicole. And so steps for wealth with intention, and this is just reinforcing what we've said so far is invest now, and really 4 quadrants to try and make it as easy as possible. So invest now, get started, no matter what it is, even if it's $50 a week, just start putting money away, and it becomes more intoxicating, if you will, as you see your money grow and produce for you. There are, of course, down markets, and down days, but that's okay over the long term. Address your estate planning, and so start with all of your beneficiaries on your accounts. If you don't have a will, you don't have power of attorneys, you can either go to rocketlawyer.com or you can work with an estate attorney. Peter and I have a preferred attorney that we work with in the Maryland area. If you need recommendations, we'd be happy to help you with that. Tax planning. What is your tax situation? Depending on your wealth, if you have over a certain amount, then how are your assets titled? What are your taxes going to be if you died? What are your taxes going to be if you sold a concentrated stock position, or if you wanted to sell stocks in your portfolio? Is it long term? Is it short term? All that. So tax planning absolutely is always a part of the conversation.
Roth conversion,
sure. We have, and then plan for the disposition of your assets. And so what do you want your legacy to be? Where are they going to go? I've had my own medical emergency. Others we know have, and it's if you wait until it's too late, then your money's may not go where you want it to go. And so if you have thoughts in mind about what your legacy, what you want your money to do for you, then think that through and talk it through. I just had a brother-in-law went to Paris actually last night. He sent me a text, and he said, if anything were to happen to me and my sister, then this is what's going to happen. Now, of course, that should be written in a will, put somewhere. But that's an example of somebody that just thought about if the plane goes down the Atlantic. I don't know, but put it out there and have those conversations, particularly if you have kids and whom you want the guardian to be, and that's important. So I think we're ending almost right on time. We wanted to leave 15 minutes, maybe a little bit early, but again, thank you all very, very much. We look forward to your questions. Peter, if you have anything.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you very much for allowing this opportunity to present this and try to improve the financial literacy amongst our listeners. Appreciate it. Really is an opportunity, and it's so important, but we'll go into that during the Q&A period. Anne, I see you've come up.
Yes, I'm back. Brecht and Peter, thank you both so much. This was a lot. I know if it's new to you, I've been kind of dabbling and learning about financial planning for a while now, and the most powerful slide is that compounding slide. And we do have some questions, and I'm gonna jump around a little bit, but the one that I wanted you all to address first was just reinforcing again the power of compounding. Comes from Aloysius, and the question is, I'm assuming on the examples it's a one-time investment of $1,000, $5,000, or $10,000, or is it annually that you have to put in the 1, 5, or 10?
It's a one-time. So yeah, if you like, so the rule of 70, if you think of it like this, if you're working with 72 years, which most of us are not because we were not taught to do this, but assuming that it was, because when we're born, our parents want to send us to school. And why do we go to school? We go to school because we need to learn in order to compete, in order to get a job. But we don't get the job typically until somewhere between the ages of 18 to 22. So if you take an increment of $1,000 when you're born, and let's say you're averaging 10% a year, then by the end of 72 years, because you get a double every 7.2 years, then that singular thousand will become close to being worth $1,024,000 at the end. It's somewhere between 72 and 73 years to be exact. But if you procrastinate 7.2 years before you start with the singular 1,000, then you just cost your child $500,000.
And to Aloysius, the example was just to make it as easy as possible to start with one amount and say nothing can change. Of course, as you go through, and the goal would be to invest more, back to the example we gave with Alex in the earlier slide of investing $5,000 per year and what that becomes. And so really that slide was just to drive home the point of the compounding and what one invests. And most of us will invest more than just once in a lifetime. And so it's just a way to try and make it as simple as possible.
I mean, one story I think it's important to point out is that when we all grow up, we go to school, we get a job at roughly at between 18 and 22 years old, right? Now I want all of you all, the listeners, to think back when you were 22. What were you thinking about? Were you thinking about, oh, I got to save money for my retirement, right? Well, at 22, I certainly wasn't thinking that. I was thinking about how in the hell am I going to get out of my parents' house? How can I afford to get out of it? I want to go party because I just spent 4 years studying my behind off to try to do well. And your mind is not thinking about any of this. It just naturally, it's not human nature to think about it unless you were taught. The problem with our educational system is that they haven't gotten into teaching this financial literacy that is so important, that needs to be taught from elementary school. And every year they should be teaching this, how to balance a checkbook, what is compound return? How does it work? Like what happens? So if you saved, and I was in the process of and the reason why
Excuse me, just interject. Ann, would you mind getting to just the screen in case we run out of time, where we have mine and Peter's contact info? I think it's I'm not sure. So it's
yeah.
It's two.
Is that after this, or is it back in the beginning?
There's two more. It's two more.
Yeah, I'll
okay,
end it so
great.
you can get on to the other questions. But so if you saved $1,000 at 22 because you listened to your parents and you said, I got my first job, I'm going to save $1,000. And I averaged 8% until 72. That's 50 years. Okay. That single increment of $1,000 is worth slightly less than 47,000. Okay. Had your parent, grandparent, aunt and uncle, friend, relative saved that same thousand 22 years earlier at 8%, that increment of that thousand would be worth almost $256,000. So over $200,000 more because I had 22 years extra of compounding, because it's the beginning, it's the early years of the compounding that matter the most. Okay, next question.
Yep. Yeah, so again, just to reinforce, instead of buying all those cute little stuffed animals and electronic toys for your babies when they're having their first birthday, maybe encourage everybody to chip a little bit toward a fund. This is just amazing math, and that, you know, it's like a crock pot, right? You set it and forget it, and it grows. And
Correct.
speaking, yeah, how it grows, we do have a question, anonymous question. Where else aside from the stock market can you find an 8% annual rate of return? We know, of course, past performance is no guarantee of future results, but where are some other places that people might
Amen.
look?
All right. So, you know, at Value Wealth, we try to break it down into, you know, so that the listeners can understand there's only two ways that you can invest your money, right? You can either be like a bank and loan your money to someone for a certain period of time, or you can be an owner by taking your money and investing it in a business, right? So an example of that would be buying the S&P 500 index
Or
or commodity or gold or anything. You're acting as an owner. So the relationship that you have when you're studying your balance between being a lender versus an owner, you're not, you know, in order to get an 8% rate of return on the lender side, you're going to have to loan your money to some pretty, you know, not well reputable people to get an average annual rate of return of 8% for 72 years, right? Because what happens on the fixed side of your managing of your money, that's all dictated by what, you know, basically what the Federal Reserve does with interest rates going up and going down. So really, to get a legitimate 8% rate of return for a long period of time, you have to be an owner. You have to take the risk of being an owner of a business to average your rate of return. If you think about it, most successful businesses in the United States, you know, if you think about, particularly if you've been your own business owner, you know, they're growing their business at between 6 and 9% a year. Their business just, that's a realistic growth rate of a business that's well run and does well. So the answer is you have to be invested on the variable side in order to get that kind of average annual rate of return.
And I think opportunities have been opened up. The term here is democratized for private assets. And that's certainly something to consider. There's a lot of due diligence that has to go into that about buying a company directly through a fund, through private equity fund, venture capital, private credit. They're more opaque. There's higher fees. Not as liquid. You can't call us today and say I need the money in a couple of days. It doesn't work like that. And so it's a nuanced answer to the question. I think if, you know, but I agree with Peter. It's a lot of times it's a lot of it's risk reward and your length of time. I mean, gold from 2010 to 2020 barely budged. Now it's through the roof, and so the, you know, longer you wait, you can see some of these things come around, but it's a longer game.
You have to be an owner. At the end of the day, how many really wealthy friends do you know have made it being a lender versus an owner?
Good point. We have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go through a couple of like rapid fire questions here. Someone wanted to know the estate attorney you use in Maryland. if you feel comfortable sharing that, or I know that like the Bar Association has a directory of people who specialize in estates and wills, trusts and estates. That's often a good place to look. Ask your friends. Is there someone that you feel comfortable recommending, or?
Yeah, and I think if we can encourage the user to just email me, and then
Okay,
I can send it out directly to him.
A lot of our
great.
referrals are based on where they're located, right?
Mhm.
Because each, depending on where they live, we work with many different estate attorneys. And it depends on where they live to be convenient for them to work with them. But the answer
Right.
is we can be happy to help them.
Okay, super. Back on that fascinating use of your granddaughter as your model, will you have to issue her a 1099?
Yes,
Mhm. And the thought is probably her income will be so minimal that she won't have to pay tax on that. Is that
correct.
okay? All right, great. Let's see. Here's kind of like the big elephant in the room. We have another anonymous. What about now? I'm in my 40s. I have no kids, no plans for them. What do I do if I've never been one to plan for retirement? I just figure I'll work until I die, especially with how unpredictable and unreliable the market and government are. So, we know that starting early is super important, but what can you do if you're, well on your way to that 72?
It's never too late to start. When in the 40 years I've been doing this, I certainly didn't understand the rate of return and compound returns as early in my career as I would have liked to have known, because if I'd done it, I would have done it differently. But I can tell you that the majority of the reaction of most people that I work with, once I explain this all to them, is that they wish they were told that many, many years ago. But for the viewer who feels that they're in their 40s, and it's never too late, right? Because you always can plan, and we're going to plan it differently for someone in their 40s because every person's situation is differently. So I guess for that particular viewer, if they want to reach out to Brecht, we'd be happy to talk to them about give them a free plan just to review and look at what I would do if I were in their shoes.
Great. It's a very generous offer, and I'm guessing there'll be a lot of people who might want to take you up on that. Yeah. Questions again about the investing for the grandchild. Does that impact their ability to get financial aid when they go to apply to college?
If it's a retirement account, no.
Okay, good one. And then the question was, is it better to open a 529 or just invest in the stock market and use that money for education in case or whatever else they want to use it in case they don't go to college?
Very good question. I would do both, okay? Because on a 529, there was new rules that went into place recently that allows you that if you do not spend 35,000 of the child's education money, that they can convert that money from a 529 to a Roth IRA.
Oh, wow. That's news. That's incredible. Great.
But
okay.
They have to have earned income to do that.
And the account's been for 15 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, just to everybody's aware of 529s, since we're starting from the building blocks data is the money grows triple tax free. You never have to pay tax on the 529, and so keep that in mind. It's great to have it on an outside, but now also they've relaxed the rules on the 529. It used to be that you can only take out 10,000 for secondary school, so meaning a school before college. Now they've upped that to 20. And so the way I personally manage my 529 is I'm assuming I'm using it for both. And
but there is a problem with all that as well, and that is if you're a really good saver and you put all the money into the 529 and the university sees that you have all this money in the 529, that could potentially affect whether the child will get financial aid or not.
Right. Okay. So investment is a retirement fund's not looked at. 529 is. Okay.
Correct.
Good to know. Okay. Just a real quick question. Are there any types of accounts that compound daily rather than annually? And I guess is.
Money market fund compounds daily.
Okay, there we go. And let's see if there's anything else. There was one question at the very beginning. Doesn't generational wealth increase depend on the stock market? And I think you showing that history of the stock market. Yes, there are going to be downs, there are going to be ups. You're not losing your shares. And, there's always that buy low, sell high, mantra. But it's a game for the patient, a game for the long haul. And that's why as you get closer to retirement, you're going to want to lessen your exposure to purely stocks, and then you're going to up your bonds, which are more guaranteed returns. Is that
Correct.
right? Did I get my CFP for that?
Yeah, you've got it. Absolutely.
So, okay. We are at time. It is actually 1:01. I think this discussion could have gone on a lot longer. Thank you so much. This was really, it planted just the foundation that I hope it would for the rest of the week. So I'd like to invite everyone to come back or, watch the recordings when the week is through. There's a lot to digest here. Thank you, Brecht. Thank you, Peter, and everyone behind the scenes. There's been a whole committee helping me out, and just want to thank everybody and wish you a good week. Take good care.
It's our
I
pleasure.
appreciate it. And if you have anybody have any questions, just reach out. I don't know, is there a way to get a hands to see whether or not they're able to see our contact information or our telephone numbers?
It's all right there.
No, I see it, but everybody see it? All right, great. Thank you all again. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.